Good morning, everyone. How are you? Ready for another day? I'm Karen Marin, for those who don't know me, and I work with Accents and Accentionnal. And today it's my great pleasure to welcome back to Accents two very, very special guests from Givaudanof. We have Arnaud Gougamboul and Eugénie Briot, and they are here to talk to you about sacred woods, the power of sacred woods. It's a fantastic presentation. Sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.
So it's a great pleasure to be there, and thank you, Karen, for inviting us again. So we're going to talk this morning about the power of sacred woods, and the presentation opens on this famous picture of a Bodhi tree in Thailand, a Bodhi tree being Ficus religiosa. And in the Buddhist religion, this tree is especially sacred because Buddha is supposed to have reached the awakening under one of these trees. So it's just one example of the many sacred trees across religions, across civilizations, and we are going to try to understand why are trees sacred, why are woods sacred, and the first answer we can give to this question is that because they are a link. They are a link between the visible and the invisible. And one another example from the Norse mythology would be this one, with the Yggdrasil tree being not only a link, but also the axis of the world in the Norse representations. So the top of the tree is supposed to be the shelter of the dead. And there is this notion of a tree being an axis or link because, of course, the branches reach up to the sky and the roots dig far under the ground where most of the time the dead are supposed to rest. So there is this notion of uniting the invisible and the visible and sometimes to be an axis. So in the Christian religion, this notion of tree of life is double because there is a tree of life in the Garden of Eden, but there is also another tree, the tree of knowledge. And this tree of knowledge is, after all, the most famous of the two trees. And it is, of course, very well known because of the Genesis explaining, you may freely take of the fruit of every tree of the garden, God said, but of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you may not take, for on the day when you take of it, death will certainly come to you. So as we all know, we did take this forbidden fruit, and it was the beginning of our human nature with all this suffering and all, let's say, the weaknesses human condition supposes. So this tree of knowledge is also a link between the invisible and the visible because it was really a passage up to another dimension of the human condition and a link to what was not visible before. So more generally, beside these tree of lives, this tree of knowledge that is rather specific to the Christian religion, to the Genesis and to the Ancient Testament, there are also other types of sacred trees across civilizations and religions that are not especially trees of life, but just specific trees that have been recognized because of their specific growth, because of their specific shape, as exceptional. And for instance, in the Maghreb landscape, when such a tree exists somewhere, it is believed to have to be exceptional because of the baraka of the saint, the force of the saint being kind of embedded in the tree. So this type of trees, most of the time, are related to a specific types of rituals, of devotion rituals, and they are maintained in special conditions and so on. And what is interesting also is that most of the time, in this case, these trees are not, let's say, productive trees. Sometimes sacred trees are productive, sometimes they are not, because when a tree is productive, sometimes you have to cut a little bit of it or damage it a little bit to be able to harvest the fruit and so on. So sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. It depends on the religion and civilization, but there are always this link between the visible and the invisible.
So, and as you may know, sacred trees, became very famous perfumery ingredients for a lot of them. And we think that it's not only because, of course, of their scent, but also because they go beyond olfaction. They go into this mythologic link, that we all have with our humankind, and also the link that all these trees have with some rituals. So we selected a few of them because you have so many sacred trees and so many raw materials, woody raw materials in perfumery, but some of them that we find are very iconic for different regions of the world, from Europe to Japan to Middle East and North Africa to India and to South America, because we also think that these ingredients are also the future, even more, of the niche perfumery and of the haute perfumery. As you may know, woody notes are very on trend, and if you go out there, you just have to smell a lot of the new launches, and you will see that woody notes are definitively a trend, and a big trend that will here to stay, because also woody notes, because perhaps also of these sacred connotations, are really linked with premium, with luxury. And we know that, for example, in China, consumers are absolutely linking woody olfactive tones with premium and luxe. So it's really interesting to cover them. So let's start with Europe and with a famous sacred wood, oak.
Yeah. Yes, because if flowers in our imagination are related to the fragility of life, to the transience of life, trees, on the contrary, are related to permanence and, in some respect, to a kind of eternity. So for the European civilization, the tree that embeds this idea most is, of course, oak. There are other types of tree that live longer than oak. The oldest tree in the world is a very small spruce tree that grows in Sweden, and it's very small because it's only because of the climate change and the global warming that it really started to grow, not a very long time ago, but it had existed for 8,000 years. And oak can live a very long time as well, and the one you can see it is about 12 meters in diameter and 18 meters in height, and it could be the oldest living tree in Europe right now. So, of course, there is with oak a kind of production, because the acorn has been eaten by human populations since very ancient times. It has been used also to fuel or to build buildings. And it is also related to the presence of the major gods. Thor in the Norse mythology, Zeus, Jupiter are also related to oaks in our civilizations. So it has been used, of course, since a very long time to build, and especially to build wood frames. And the one that you can see here is the Notre Dame de Paris wood frame that has unfortunately burnt in 2019. And among the trees that were used to build this wood frame, some of them were something like 1,300 years old, because they were already several hundred years old when being cut. And yes, so they were so ancient that it was, of course, a disaster to have them be lost in these conditions. So yes, a symbol for endurance, stability, longevity, of course. And there is also with these oak tree a kind of possibility to transmit this symbol of longevity to some other substances, just like wine, for instance. Oak barrels are, of course, very much used in the wine process of fabrication, and there is also this idea that the longevity of the tree could be transferred to the longevity of the product itself.
So, and it's the reason why we decided to select for you the first raw material that you are smelling right now. It's a oak wood roasted absolute from France. And in fact, it's really interesting because in perfumery, the use of oak has always been linked, in fact, with the production of the barrels, you know, the production of the wine barrels. It's really something that is linked to the past. So how does it work? In fact, it's really interesting because, you know, as Eugénie was saying, if oak was used, it's because of its mechanical property, you know, it's very resistant, but also because of its organoleptic qualities. And it's very interesting because when you are building the barrels, in fact, you have to roast the oak, and you have even like roasting masters, toasting masters, because depending on the level of toasting and the level of roasting, then the flavor of the oak will change. So it's really something that, as you can see, is very multisensorial. And of course, the perfumery industry decided to use, in fact, the leftover of this barrel production to try to produce an amazing raw material that you are smelling. And it's very interesting because when you are smelling it, it's already very woody, but at the same time, you can feel something very, I would say, roasted, vibrant, even a bit nutty, dried fruit, you know, something that is absolutely delicious and slightly gourmand from the beginning. So the way that we are producing, as I told you, is really a derivative of the wood barrel production. And as I told you, toasting has become an art. So depending on the level of toasting and the level of roasting of the barrel, the raw material will change in terms of the smell. If you have a light roast, you will have something that is more delicate, sweet and round. Medium roast, vanilla, caramel notes start to appear. Sometimes dark chocolate also note can appear. And if you really go for a high roast, then you will have like a coffee notes and even like smoky bacon, maple syrup, you know, that appears. It's really interesting because a oak tree is a source of approximately 2 barrels. So as you can see, there is a lot of leftover. So it's the reason why also we wanted to capitalize on this leftover to do some upcycling, interesting, in fact, work and create these raw materials. It's a supercritical extraction, so it is used with CO2 to really boost, in fact, with a low temperature to really boost the extraction and really preserve the olfactive quality of these raw materials. In terms of the fragrances, we will pass you one that is an iconic one, that is Angel Shares from Kilian. We really wanted, in fact, to realize this effect, you know, and the link with the wine, the alcohol, and the timelessness of that is embodied by oak by passing you this one. I also put on the slide Quercia from Bottega Veneta that is not sold anymore, but that was an amazing fragrances because it was revealing perhaps the more, I would say, dry, peppery, balsamic notes of the oak that is super interesting. But within Angel Share, you are really, you know, smelling the revelation of the nature of the raw material that is used when creating these fragrances because it's very boozy. So you have, in fact, this effect, this alcoholic effect when smelling these fragrances. And it's really interesting because it's also showcase you how modern you can twist some oak notes because, you know, with the revamp of gourmand, in fact, it's super interesting to explore gourmand without sugar by using woody notes that can provoke this gourmand effect with this licorice, boozy, you know, like a spirits type of notes that are really changing the approach of wood and the approach of gourmand at the same time. From Europe, we are now moving to Japan with the inoki.
So inoki is also a sacred wood in Japan, and it is, as a symbol, it is associated to light. Hinoki means fire tree because it was used to create fire and to produce fire. So there is this association to light, and it is also dedicated to the sun goddess Amaterasu, and for this reason also related to light. But beside this symbolism, it is really the counterpart of oak in the Japanese civilization, with inoki being the main material to build temples. And here you can see the Horyuji temple in Nara, and this temple is 100 years old. So there is, of course, together, well, just like in the case of oak, with hinoki, this idea of eternity or timelessness or a link through time that would be related to this specific tree.
So what is interesting here when you are smelling inoki, and I like what you are saying about, you know, the link between inoki and oak, because as you can smell, it's very different, but you have this trance, you know, for me that is also very interesting, because both of these trees are really defying the time, you know, and they are really able to convey something that is beyond humans, you know, in terms of a lifetime span. So when you are smelling inoki, what is super interesting is you really have this balance between something that is very refreshing, you know, that is even a bit like, for me, slightly minty, camphorous, you know, something that is very fresh, and at the same time something that is super dense, you know, that embodies this strength of the wood, something that is also very like incense-like. So this is something that we love, and in fact this contrast is very much used and appreciated in the Japanese culture, because you may know of this trend that is the forest bathing trends that came from Japan, that is called, in fact, so I will try to say it in a proper way, so it's Shinjuku, if I think I'm right, I think so. So, and in fact, this idea of forest bathing came from the fact that, you know, this refreshing but also strength is supposed, thanks to molecules that are released by the inoki that are called the phyton seeds, to really help people to feel better, you know. So it's not only about hugging the tree, but just having a nice walk within the inoki forest in Japan, and so that you are able to smell and to breathe this phyton seed effect. So one brand really decided to work around this concept. So it's a brand called New & Co. It's a very indie brand from the US that is a mix between a sensorial and a functional brand, and they decided to launch this forest lung product based on this concept of phyton seed and using a lot of inoki. And when you are smelling it, you can really smell also this idea of comfort, comfort and comfort at the same time. So something very like, I would say fresh, but very strong, very also foresty, very woody, that is very interesting. It's like a true forest atmosphere when you are smelling it. The inoki raw material itself is a very precious raw material in perfumery, because it's very, I would say, difficult to be able to extract inoki. So the one that you are smelling is an inoki wood oil from Japan. And in fact, it's very interesting because we have to be very careful with this resource. It's a resource that is very, I would say, not in danger, but very protected. So it's the reason why we are sourcing our inoki in the region of Okayama. We are using only woods that have been grown for this purpose. You know, it's something that is super interesting for that. So, and of course, it's distilled with a purifying water. You know how Japanese are really into rituals, you know, when it's come in terms of life being, but also when it's come about craftings. And we are using a purifying water in the small village of Shinjo. It's really a place that is celebrating this harmony between human and nature. So you've been able to smell this inoki pure wood oil that is really interesting. Again, as I told you, camphorous, something also that is slightly cypressy, you know, very fresh and at the same time incensey. And I would say that the most famous illustration of an inoki note would certainly be the inoki from Comme des Garçons that was created in collaboration with Monocle, because you have something that is woody but also a bit dewy, resinous, For me, it's really the more cypress interpretation of an inoki wood. I just put on the slide a more modern interpretation of inoki because we don't have a lot of time. I will not be able to let you smell it, but it's very interesting. It's the Inoki Phantom from Boy Smells. Again, a very indie brand from the US that we are working with and that is super interesting, where you will be able to smell afterward, if you are interested, that in fact the inoki here is treated also very leathery, spicy, with something that is a bit like lactonic, so smoky and addictive. So again here, there is perhaps opportunities through woods to create new addiction. We saw that with the oak, you know, so reinventing gourmand. But with inoki, you can also, why not reinvent comfort, lactonic, powdery, something very comforting that is also super addictive. So now let's move to cedarwood, so North African sacred woods.
So cedarwood is, again, a tree that would be a symbol of being a link through time. A cedarwood can commonly live for 2,000 years. I said about the temple in Nara that it was 100 years. It was, of course, 1,000 years. So this longevity is, of course, very much known about cedarwood, and that's why it's been especially associated to this notion of kind of surpassing human time and being a link far beyond the duration of a human life. So a context in which cedarwood has been used in the past in the Egyptian civilization was to carve coffins. And the one that you can see here is the one of Ramses II. It's not the first coffin of Ramses II because a few decades after the burial of Ramses II, his tomb was pillaged, and the mummy was placed in another coffin, and it is this one that you can see here. So this one traveled to France not a very long time ago, but normally it's kept in Egypt. And of course, it's a perfect symbol of this ability to connect to eternity in a way. Another context in which cedarwood was used, let's say, in Europe this time, is the fact that, of course, cedarwood originates from Lebanon. So in Europe, it came to be better known in the 18th century. And from this time on, planting a cedarwood started to be something that would make sense for aristocrats, especially to do, for it to be transmitted to the next generation. So the first cedarwood to have been planted in France was planted by Bernard de Jussieu in the Jardin des Plantes in Paris in 1734, and it was offered by the London Botanic Gardens. And it is funny because it was transported from London to Paris, quite an adventure at the time, in a hat. So it was so precious that the pot had been kept in the hat of Bernard de Jussieu to protect it as much as possible. So, and this tree is still there today in the Jardin des Plantes, and it has now reached something like 20 meters high. So it is one example, but this tradition to plant a cedarwood was commonly practiced, let's say, by the aristocrats of the 18th, 19th century for them to go beyond their own life and to be transmitted to the next generation. So there is this notion of eternity that is kind of embedded in the symbolism of cedarwood, and when considered as a forest, you know, because when grown in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, it's really a matter of forests of cedarwood existing, and it's a little bit like entering a temple in a way, because it's being surrounded with all these trees being so old and referring to a past that human memory has no idea of.
So the cedar wood that you are smelling right now, It's slightly different from a traditional cedar wood because we really wanted to highlight also innovative process when it's come of crafting ingredients. So the one that you are smelling is called Cedar Wood Atlas Neo Absolute. So it's not a cedar wood oil that is the traditional way of doing cedar wood when it's come to perfumery ingredients, and I will enter into the process slightly afterwards. But with this Neo Absolute, what is interesting is that on top of being a very innovative process to be able to extract it, it's really that it conveys a very different olfactive notes. So of course you all recognize the famous cedar woods, even a bit like pencil-like, type of note. But here you have something that is very richer, more sophisticated. For us, it's also a bit more leathery, that is super interesting. And you have also a kind of apricot kernel effect within, So again, something that is slightly more addictive, slightly more mouth-watering, and that is super interesting. Also, you could have some like fig shades, something that is also a bit green, lactonic on top. So it's something that is very interesting. So why did we decide, in fact, to also invent a new type of cedar? Of course, cedar is perhaps one of the most famous trees when it's come to perfumery with sandalwood, and we will cover sandalwood just afterwards. But it's really interesting to see that cedar wood has a lot of symbolism, as Eugénie was saying, it's all about timelessness, but it's also about, taking care of yourself and taking care of your mind. So, in fact, Eau de Carme, one of the perhaps first fragrances that were used to heal people, was containing a lot of cedar wood because of its therapeutic benefits. But what is interesting is that when you are looking about the emotional properties of cedar wood, it seems that it's very associated with this notion of fighting against fear and anxiety and allowing you to move forward your goal with peace in mind, serenity, and perseverance. And this idea of peace of mind gave us the idea of crafting a cedar wood that was perhaps more comforting, more gourmand, richer, something that was more interesting. And also when we came to consumers, asking them spontaneously, what do you think about cedar wood? How does it smell? For them, spontaneously also, they have this paradox image of cedar wood telling us it's very earthy, but also very fresh and very natural. So we really wanted to craft a cedar wood able to convey this notion of serene and clean atmosphere, but also with an elegant and relaxing comfort. So how did we do? First, we selected the right variety because, in perfumery, a lot of the varieties that are called cedar woods are in fact not cedar woods, they are junipers. So, for example, we are using a lot of Texas cedar wood or Virginian cedar woods, but in fact, those trees are junipers, so they are not belonging to the same botanical family. The only botanical family that is a true cedar is the Atlas cedar wood used in perfumery. And generally, you do essential oils, and it's coming from Morocco because, again, it's a process that is very obvious. Cedar wood in Morocco is used to craft a lot of cabinets, to do a lot of artwork. And we are using the chips and the dust of these cabinet makers, to distill and create an essential oil. But here, because we wanted to create a new quality, as I told you, we decided to innovate. And in fact, we used the chips that were already used to distill the oils. And in fact, we discovered that these chips were not totally exhausted, in terms of the olfactive molecules. So thanks to a new process, a new type of solvent extraction, we have been able to upcycle, but really upcycle, in fact, it's a creative way to reuse the dust and what should be normally thrown away to really create a new quality of cedar wood that is an absolutely upcycled ingredient that we are calling the cedar wood Atlas Neo Absolute that you are smelling right now. And as I told you, it's really changing also the olfactive facet of a traditional cedar wood, really matching what we wanted to achieve at the beginning. So this notion of comfort, serenity, but also very rich and quite luxurious in terms of the notes. So some example of the famous cedar wood when it's come to fine fragrance, of course. So here we are passing the Prada Iris Cedre, but just before talking about these fragrances, we really wanted to re-highlight that one fragrance that really changed the game when it's come to woody notes for women was Féminité du Bois for Serge Lutens. Of course, you know, and it's not an hazard if it's coming from Serge Lutens, because, you know, Serge Lutens is a big fan of Morocco. He lived in Morocco. What is interesting is that, you know, this fragrance, in fact, is really born in 1968, you know, because it was in the mind of Mr. Lutens from a long time. When he discovered Morocco, he always had a branch of cedar, you know, in his pocket after one, because he saw that it was an amazing fragrance, and he always dreamed to create a cedar fragrance. So it's exactly what he did a few years afterwards, you know. And in fact, it's really interesting because Féminité du Bois, it's part of the history of haute parfumerie. It's an icon. It's a product that we are very proud of, you know, because it's part of the Givaudanof legacy for a long time. And it has really changed the way of thinking about woods and cedar woods, but also sandalwood, of course, in perfumery when it's come to feminine fragrances. And when you are looking nowadays, for example, in the prestige area, a good girl that is also very woody, you can see that in fact these trends perhaps took a bit of time to enter the mainstream market, but it's really a strong one at the moment. And it's not a hazard, again, as I told you, premiumization is around the corner, so for prestige also, and woody notes are really conveying this prestige effect. So this Féminité du Bois fragrances was cornerstone, in fact, in the history of perfumery. But to really appreciate cedar, I think it's interesting to smell the iris and cedar infusion from Prada. Of course, because for us, it's perhaps one of the most beautiful cedar on the market, because it's very direct, very fusing, very vibrant, and at the, you know, revealing all the strengths and the powers that the cedar can have, because it has been so well wrapped with this powdery iris, you know, notes that is really creating a contrast, because something that is dry and powdery at the same time, vibrant and round at the same time, direct and comforting at the same time. Perhaps because we have slightly a bit more time, we were very afraid because we started late, but I will let you smell another one that is the Louis Crown from Louboutin. Just because to show you how also at the moment cedar is reinvented, especially targeting Middle East consumers, with something that is very more modern and addictive, mixing in fact maltol and leathery effect within a cedar note to create something that is, I would say, perhaps the quintessence of the actual perfumery. And you will recognize, I'm sure, some olfactive notes that you can smell all around here, because it's very this Middle East interpretation, but using cedar as a socle, as a base, to reinvent also this leathery, ambery, dry things, dry woods, and adding a little bit of gourmand inside. So after cedar, another iconic wood, perhaps the other most famous one, and also that was part of Féminité du Bois, you know, it's of course the sandalwoods.
Sandalwood. So sandalwood is not as such a very, let's say, a spectacular type of tree, but of course it's been related to the to religion since the beginning of times, we could say, and it has been especially associated to weddings and to cremations in the context of Indian religions. So sandalwood is one of the sacred woods that is more specifically dedicated to being burnt. It's not in the practices, in the rituals and so on. It's not the case of all of the woods we've mentioned, but a sandalwood is considered in this type of state, being fumigated and being, in this case, again, a link between the visible and the invisible, a way to kind of carry the prayers up to the gods, And this is something that makes it very special, because this connection that is established with the gods can find also its counterpart in the way sandalwood is considered as a gift from the gods. And more than some other types of wood, so some other types of woods have also been used in medicinal context, but sandalwood has, more than any others, been used in this medicinal context. It's meant to protect human beings, it's meant to elevate themselves beyond their nature, and it's meant also to convey to them part of the beauty of the gods. So sandalwood has also been part of the cosmetics. There is in India this extremely famous Mysore sandal soap that's been existed for more than 1 century, because it's been kind of created in the context of the First World War. At the time, the Maharaja of Mysore, Mysore being the largest producer of sandalwood at the time, because of the First World War, it was not possible to Mysore to sell its sandalwood in the same way to European countries anymore. And because of this specific context, the idea came to the Maharaja of Mysore to create a soap that would be a beauty soap and that would contain sandalwood. So it contained a crazy rate of sandalwood oil, and it is a very iconic and unique soap and product, you know, in the Indian imagination, even today. So yes, sandalwood would have this specificity to kind of convey the beauty of the gods up to the human beings.
So the raw material that you are smelling right now is a sandalwood album oil from Australia. So I will enter into that because, you know, sandalwood was a species very in danger. So it has moved from India to Australia so that we are still able now to use this raw material. But before entering into this story, I wanted just to highlight the fact that the one that you are smelling is an absolute, you know, quality. It's really delicious. What is giving the particular tone of this sandalwood is in fact the santalol. Santalol is the molecules, you know, that is really giving the smell of the sandalwood, but you have 2 types of santalol. You have the beta one that is giving these very warm and milky tones, and you have the alpha santalol that is closer to cedar. So perhaps it's not an hazard if sometimes cedar and sandalwood, you know, goes together into creation. And what is interesting is that the true sandalwood, the sandalwood album oil from Australia, has a huge part of beta sandalol, so the one that is giving these warm, creamy, milky tones, and it's the reason why it's so praised. So as I told you, in fact, it's really interesting because it's a case of, and it's a very nice story about how we can save raw materials, you know, for the purpose of perfumery also, because, you know, sandalwood for a long time was over-harvested. So now from 1999, in fact, the sandalwood that we are using is coming from Australia. In Australia, what is interesting is that the climate allowed us to be able to let sandalwood album grow again because there is the same tropical climate as southern India. So it's interesting because the sandalwood that is coming from Australia has the exact same olfactory finesse and beneficial properties of the one that was originally from India. So it's it was a way to save, in fact, this magic tree. And it's the over-harvest also was one of the reasons why you can now find on the market a lot of molecules that are smelling sandalwood, because with we all had to face the short of its essential oil, you know. So a lot of synthesis compounds were created in the 19th century to, in fact, try to counterbalance the fact that sandalwood was in danger. And Givaudanof at Givaudanof is one of the best, I would say, rich, natural and creamy sandal notes that we have because it's really reproduce the exact beta santalol type of olfactive characteristics. So it's really interesting because this sandalwood, in fact, nowadays, of course, is used by doing, is produced by doing steam distillation. So, you know, it's it's around 24 to 36 hours to complete this distillation because it takes a lot of time. The molecules, the sandalol, are they have a very low volatile profile. So we need, to process. It's a very, I would say, slow process, and perhaps it's a very protective one to be sure that we are really extracting the best from the sandalwood. Of course, Sandalwood Album Australia, when it's come to find fragrance, perhaps an icon, another corner store in the fragrance history was Samsara. The original formula from 1989 contained 20% of Mysore sandalwood oil. So as you can imagine, it was quite a shock, We are all talking about overdose in the modern perfumery, and this was an overdose at that time. Overdose is really perhaps one of key also formulation assets for our perfumer nowadays to create modern addiction, but at that time also it was very provocative. It's really interesting because if I wanted to let you smell first the sandalwood album oil, it's because we are also using another type of sandalwood in perfumery, and it's not the album one, it's the spicatum one. It's a native cousin that is coming directly from Australia and New Zealand, but as you can see, in terms of the proportion, it's not exactly the same that in the album one, because in this case you have less alpha and beta santalols than in the album one. That means that from an olfactive point of view, it will have greener, fresher top notes and something that is also a bit earthy and smoky. So it's the reason why that if you really want to, I would say, celebrate the sandalwood album, you need to really have now this album oil that is used on top of the spicatum. So, and we will let you smell two fragrances to illustrate, in fact, all the facets of sandalwood album. You are smelling a first one that is from Serge Lutens again, Santal Majuscule, that is an icon, because here you can really smell a sandalwood that is very warm, very round, quite spicy, a little bit rosy also, but it's interesting because for us, it's like a Samsara 3.0, so a very new type of Samsara, something that is very santal rosé, and it's interesting because sandalwood and rosy notes really work super well together, but here you have a modern interpretation with even something that is slight cocoa inside that is very interesting with these spicy notes. The other one that we will smell is from Juliette Has a Gun, to show you also a very, I would say, younger, Gen Z-driven type of sandalwood, and to show you that Santal can also drive to this olfactive territory that is all around this powdery, skin-like type of scent. And it's really interesting because here you have sandalwood, musky, but also very aniseic, so fresher, something that is floral still, fresher, but something that is very I would say, based on the background notes. So it's really a parfum pot, but a very modern and young parfum pot that was created by Juliette Has a Gun. It's interesting because when you are smelling those two fragrances, in fact, those two fragrances are really for us the two sides that you can create when you want to caricature sandalwood notes. And in fact, they resonate with the way consumers perceive sandalwoods. For them, in fact, sandalwood is comforting yet powerful. It's pure yet warm. It's velvety yet dark. So that means that, for them, it's a very paradoxal also ingredient. And you can see that from a very sensual and elegant interpretation like Santal Majuscule, or a more clean and fresh parfum de peau like Ode to Dullness, those two interpretations are very linked to what consumers imagine about sandalwood, and those two creations are really celebrating the sandalwoods to its full. And we will be finishing this conference with another sacred wood from Latin America, Palo Santo.
Palo Santo. Palo Santo being the name given by the Spanish conquistador to a family of trees that were used in Argentina, Paraguay, Bolivia, Brazil, and that were used both for their medicinal properties and for religious reasons. So It is a family of trees, and it means, of course, sacred tree. It's very literally meaning this. So again, just like sandalwood, just like this sandalwood that is being burnt in specific religious context, Palo Santo is also an essence that is very much related to this holy smoke that elevates, and especially in the shamanic rituals, still used in the Andes mountains. And widely used in the Andes Mountains, Palo Santo is still related to this kind of usages.
So the one that you are smelling right now, in fact, is a Gaillac wood oil from Paraguay. As Eugénie was saying, when we are seeing these pictures of Palo Santo, this is the traditional way of picturing Palo Santo. But in fact, as Eugénie was saying, Palo Santo is a generic name, so it's really cover a lot of different trees belonging to these sacred trees families. And in fact, the one that we are using in perfumery is called Gaillac wood, so it's part of the Palo Santo family. So it's not this one. In fact, it's not the one that you are burning like a stick. It's really a darker wood, that you are extracting using, of course, a distillation. It's really interesting for us to showcase this ingredient for you today because it's perhaps the last time that you will smell it. The Gaillac wood, in fact, is in danger, like rosewood was at some point. So this smell is becoming perhaps a smell that we will not be able to smell in the future. It will be out of the perfumer palette very soon. So it's really interesting for us also to showcase that some ingredients are disappearing and that we all have to really take care of these ingredients. And thanks to different programs, perhaps they will come back at some point into the perfumer palette, but for the moment, it's a very, I would say, even archival type of scent that will still stay in our memory for the future and that we will try to be able to recreate. Of course, we are very interested to be able to still create some fragrances with this amazing ingredient as much as we can because, as Eugénie was saying, from a healthcare point of view, but a spiritual care point of view, Gaillac wood is really embodying, in fact, a lot of very interesting facets. And also from an olfactive point of view, it's so smoky, so addictive to this smoky, warm, incensey type of smell, something that is also, even like for me, slightly bacon, on the side, but also very balsamic, that it really allows you to create olfactive notes that normally are very difficult to create in general. So the way that for the moment we are still being able to use Palo Santo and Gaillac wood, it's because, so we are working with institutions. These crops are now protected by the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species. So it's the reason why it's becoming really rare and that perhaps it will disappear really soon. And in fact, it's coming from a Paraguay region called the Chaco. 100,000 kilograms of Gaillac wood is produced and exported from Paraguay each year, generally, primarily for the fragrance and perfume industry. But as I told you, perhaps this fragrance in the near future will, unfortunately, this ingredient will unfortunately disappear. So you smell the raw material, but we wanted to finish by let you smell two olfactive interpretations from Palo Santo. So the first one is the Fortis from Liquide Imaginaire. For us, it's interesting because it's really the celebration of smokiness, the celebration of the smoky effect of the Gaillac wood. So also very Middle East driven in terms of type of olfactive family, but with a lot of changes because as you will be able to smell, it's very also cedarwood, sandalwood, smoky, and it's really the Gaillac as we can imagine, pure. And if you are comparing with the raw material itself, you will see a strong link. It's a celebration of these ingredients that will perhaps soon disappear from our palettes. And the second one and last fragrance that we will pass to you today, it's a very different interpretation from Palo Santo, perhaps a more like Imaginarium way of thinking about Palo Santo, that is more creamy vanilla. It's from Carner, Barcelona, that is exhibiting also just out there. It's very interesting because it's a Palo Santo, Gaillac wood, vetiver, something that is also vanilla, a bit like peanutty, you know, on the side, so something very like pyrazine. So it's a more like fancy way of interpreting Palo Santo, but again, a very addictive and gourmand way of, in fact, talking about Palo Santo. So before giving the last word to Eugénie, I just wanted to highlight the fact that if we decided to talk to you about the sacred wood, it's because, as you've seen, those raw materials are super interesting, super various, super strong. They are conveying amazing emotions. Some of them are in danger. Some of them, we have been able to save them, you know, like the sandalwood. So we hope we will be able to do the same with the Gaillac in the near future. But also because from an olfactive point of view, it resonates strongly with consumer, with the new trends, how to reinvent gourmand, how to reinvent skin-feel fragrances, how to reinvent this kind of very smoky, leathery type of notes. So a lot of trends are based on these woody notes, and so it's the reason why they are perhaps more sacred than ever, you know, because in the mythology, in the mystic, in the mindset, they are our link and our best link with nature and with emotion at the same times.
Yes, and more than any other materials, you know, because some of them are related to this imagination, related to smoke, more than any other materials, they are also the ones that send us back most efficiently, let's say, to the very etymology of perfume, per fumum, by the intermediary of smoke. And for this reason, they remain very special in our imagination, being a source of very powerful significations. They are a link to the invisible, they are a symbol of eternity, and they are a gift from the gods. So we love sacred woods, and they still have a beautiful story to be written by us all in the future.
Thank you very much.